When you can play any card in Vintage, the power level bar is super high. That's why it might surprise you that the best card from the Lord of the Rings set was not the One Ring. It was not Orcish Bowmasters. Instead, it was a 5 mana common. Lorien Revealed is the single best Lord of the Rings card in Vintage, and it's changing the format. My name is Justin, I'm actually level 1, and this is Voice of Vintage. Okay, welcome back, Vintage gamers. There are 3 things to look at when evaluating Lorien Revealed in the context of Vintage. First, and the most important, as this card is blue. Well, it's a simple requirement. Many cards in Magic meet this requirement, but it's very pivotal to the card's playability because being a blue card in Vintage means you get to pitch to the alternate casting cost of Force of Will and of Force of Negation. These 2 cards combined as stopgaps to keep powerful turn 1, turn 0 kills in check. And it's extremely important that you meet a requisite blue count to increase the probability of having a starting hand that contains a Force of Will or a Force of Negation and a blue card to pitch to the alternate casting cost. You'll find that the commonly accepted range is usually 18 plus blue cards, where 18 is on the lower end and you won't always have a chance, the chance is lower of having the Force of Will plus blue card in your opening hand when you have 18, but it's like acceptable enough for like combo decks that just are looking for an extra, piece of permission or a way to push their combo through on turn 1. You see this like frequently in decks like Jewel Shops, Combo Shops, Combo Jewel. That deck requires a large number of colorless artifacts in the deck, which means it's very hard to hit the sufficient blue count needed to be able to play Force of Will at a reasonable rate. And so when these decks are adding, too many artifacts or too many non-blue creatures in their normally, a base blue combo deck, you end up with a less chance of being able to cast the Force of Will when you need it on turn 1 to stop the opposing combo deck from killing you. So that's why it's very important to be hitting these high numbers of blue cards in your deck to facilitate early turn 0, turn 1 Force of Wills, basically. Just because a card is blue doesn't really make it a Vintage playable card, though you'd be surprised on how close it does. It also kind of needs to have a role. It needs to fulfill some kind of job in your deck. In Lorien's case, it fulfills an extremely unique role, and it's kind of a pseudo fetch land. The island cycling ability on Lorien Revealed is super strong, and many decks in Vintage are playing a base blue, base island mana base. So not only do you have access to basic island off your island cycling, but you have access to all the island dual lands, Underground Sea, Tropical Island, Volcanic Island, so on and so forth. And these decks a lot of times will play blue fetch lands, so think like Scalding Tarn, fetch lands that fetch an island, and then their entire land mana base that is fetchable are all islands. So it fits right at home in all these different blue Vintage decks that are supporting, Gush and Force of Will and just a base island mana base. And so what this Lorien does, it kind of increases the amount of fetches you have in your deck. The jury's probably still out on just how close Lorien is to a fetch land. My gut instinct right now is it's somewhere greater than half a fetch, but definitely less than 1 fetch. It's definitely not an equivalent. You can't just take a fetch out and put a Lorien in most cases, because island cycling does require 1 colorless generic mana. And so if you have Lorien as your only mana source, it doesn't actually function as a mana source because you do need that requisite 1 colorless. You can think of something like Tolarian Academy in this sense. Like if you have a Tolarian Academy but you have no artifacts that cost 0, your Tolarian Academy produces no mana. Kind of the same thing is happening here with Lorien. So that becomes a little murky of an evaluation because in Vintage you have access to Moxen and Black Lotus and Lotus Petal and all of these 0 mana, sometimes off-color mana sources that can give you a way to achieve that generic mana even on turn 1. So something like a hand that contains a Mox Pearl and a Lorien Revealed is actually a Mox Pearl and an Underground Sea in your maybe blue-black combo deck, tinker deck, something like that. So you then have to evaluate, well, maybe because my deck plays all 5 Moxen, it actually pushes my Lorien closer to that whole 1 fetch land count. It's probably still not 1, but it's probably closer to 1 than it is to a half a fetch land, and that's because it's based on how many Moxen you play to enable the generic 1 mana island cycling. It should probably be noted that island cycling is a shuffle effect. Shuffle effects are powerful in Vintage. They enable cards like Brainstorm and Sensei's Top to push past their initial, power level when you can shuffle away 2 cards with Brainstorm, or you don't like the top cards of your library, so you island cycle and you shuffle your cards and get new cards on the top of your library. That makes these cards like Brainstorm and Sensei's Top really, something worth playing. And Lorien does provide additional shuffle effects just like a fetch land would. And then the third important thing about Lorien Revealed is its actual base power as a card. This is a, 3 blue draw 3. And it might be possible this card is playable even if the base power of the card isn't high enough. And I think that might even be the case. But the fact that 3 blue draw 3 is something that you would not hate casting and is castable in Vintage, make it just a really, really solid card. Like, you're not going to put a 3 blue draw 3 in your Vintage deck. You might not even put that in your standard deck. But when you add 3 blue draw 3 on top of being a blue card and being an island cycler, that's what makes this card really tick. It's all the parts combined. And what you really are looking at is the fact that if we're kind of equivalating them between a Lorien and a fetch land, if your fetch land in a top deck scenario is a draw 3 for 5 mana, you're just going to be excited about that. If you have both exhausted all your resources, you and your opponent have no cards, you both have a solid mana base in play but don't have any more things to do, and you top deck a card, would you rather top deck a land that does nothing, or would you rather top deck a pseudo fetch land that also could just draw you 3 cards? And 5 mana is not unachievable in Vintage. In fact, it's pretty frequently achieved with Moxen, Sol Ring, Mana Crypt, Larian Academy. The Vintage fast mana situation actually supports the casting of 3 blue. You're not looking to make your deck to cast the spell. You're not going out of your way to try to make the spell castable, but it just so happens that in a longer game, a more drawn out game, maybe a game where you just happen to draw a Mana Vault, this card is going to get cast, and it has already been cast frequently against me and from my side of the table as well. So it's just very important that now your land, land quote unquote, is not only going to save you on turn 0, where it will pitch to your Force of Will and save you from being comboed, but also it can save you on turn 10 when both players are out of resources and you top deck it to draw 3 cards. It's just a really frequent Vintage play pattern, and the fact that it does, fixes your dead draws off the top is just very, very, very powerful. It's probably worth noting that sorcery is kind of a small aspect of this card, but it's something that you should be noting because sorcery is like a card type that's easily manipulated, and there are interesting ways to rebuy your card. You have cards like the Ethereal Whale. That might not be the right name of that card. I can't remember. I'll show it on the screen. And the Mystic Sanctuary. Both of these cards are ways you can, cash back in on your 5 mana. So I draw 3. I draw a fetch land, and my fetch land fetches a Mystic Sanctuary. My Mystic Sanctuary puts my draw 3 back on the top of my library, and we're back at it again. So it's worth noting that those kind of things are probably the least important part of the card, but they are still a part of the card. And so I think I've thoroughly explained what Lorien does and why what Lorien does is powerful. But how does it affect Vintage as a whole? Like, if I'm making this video about it, that I must feel strongly that it's doing something interesting and worth talking about. And so what I think Lorien does, in no, understating terms, I think it's going to just change Vintage deck building forever. Like, on the level of something like fetching a dual land. Because being able to turn your off-color Moxen into islands while pitching to Force of Will is just so strong. And it's already even enabled an entirely new archetype of control to basically cement itself at the top of the vintage metagame. Right now, one of the strongest decks and most played decks in the format is a blue-black Lurrus control deck that is running full Moxen and 9 colorless spell lands. These lands are Urza Saga, Wasteland, and Strip Mine, and they are some of the most powerful cards in the entire format. The cost of using them to play, the cost of using your land slot for turn to do some kind of powerful action, whether it be destroy your opponent's land or make saga tokens, is quite a high cost, and usually comes at deck building costs and constraints. Where if you are playing, these colorless lands that are pseudo spells almost, you need to build the rest of your deck in a way that allows you to still be able to cast your cards. And what Lorien Revealed does here is it kind of eases those deck building constraints and lessens the cost of running these colorless spell bands in your deck, because you're going to still be able to hit your blue counts for Forcible. You're still going to be able to cast your blue spells or even your splash color spells, because your Lorien is going to get you the mana you need. And so while that these 9 spell lands don't tap for colorful mana, we can still hit the requirements we need. So a Lorien Revealed mana base, you still probably have, you still want to probably provide a low color count in your pips. Like you'll see the blue-black version plays things like Orcish Bowmaster 1 black, dress down 1 blue. You're gonna fit in a lot of cards that cost blue or blue-black. But even when you're already playing Lurrus, the that already constrains the number of cards you can cast anyways that have multiple pips. So this Lorien Revealed is going to help all of these base blue Tinker decks that are running their off-color Moxen suite with Soul Rings and Mana Crypts, and it's going to help shore up the deck's black, red, and white splashes. All these decks are base blue and usually splash black for tutors. Maybe you splash white for Swords of Plowshares or Initiative Creatures, red for Pyroblasts, or so on and so forth. And those decks, those Urza Saga decks, were already kind of in a shaky spot where you really did need to have your mana base that produced, the blue mana symbol or the black mana symbol. And this Lorien Revealed are just going to shore up those mana bases like crazy. And it's very, very important right now to be playing Wasteland. I think Wasteland, one of the strongest lands of all time, and maybe one of the most crucial lands in Vintage, because what it does is it combats opponents' Bazaar of Baghdad. Bazaar of Baghdad being super, super powerful and a must-answer card in some way, whether that be, turn off their Bazaar of Baghdad, destroy their Bazaar of Baghdad, hit their graveyard, or kill them outright. And then the second part of Wasteland is it's incredibly important at Urza Saga mirrors. So the card Urza Saga on its own usually is not enough of a clock, but when you're playing 2 Urza Saga decks against each other, a lot of the time your Urza Saga becomes more important. So if I'm playing PO with no sagas versus PO with sagas, I actually think Urza Saga becomes not an important card, and you actually have a lot of downsides to not being able to make blue mana. But if you're playing Esper Tinker versus Esper Tinker, both decks are on Urza Saga as a main game plan, Urza Saga actually becomes more important, and many games are decided by Urza Saga timing windows and who gets ahead and who has more Moxen and those kind of things. And by freeing up blue decks to play Wastelands in their Urza Saga deck, you are just pushing so far ahead in the mirror. Where if you're playing Wastelands and Sagas and your opponent is only playing Sagas, it's just so much less likely that they're going to come out ahead in the Saga mirror. And it's also just meaning with Wastelands being played across the format in like a variety of decks, including Control, you're just pushing Bazaar out of the format. Bazaar right now is at its lowest meta share I've seen in a very long time. Frequently, 2% for each Bazaar deck, maybe 6, 7, 8% total of the metagame share. That's like half of what it was maybe a year ago. So you have Lorien Revealed, I think, is the main way that these decks are being able to play 9 colorless spell lands. And it's just really changing everything. And it's happening fast, so you got to be able to keep track of it. So that's how I think it's single-handedly changing the vintage metagame. It's just gonna thrust control forward, push Bazaar down, and I'm just really excited to track these changes. I think it's super interesting how a common card can just overthrow everything that you know about deck building and mana bases in the Magic's oldest format. So I just want to see what people do. I want to track these changes as they progress, see how people fine tune their mana bases. As I said earlier, I don't know how much a Lorien counts towards your fetch count. It's kind of a flexible and a thing that's in flux, and maybe we can mathematically, evaluate it. Maybe we can figure out exactly, if I have this many monks and it's worth this much, and I can only cut this many lands. But I haven't seen that yet. If you have seen that, let me know. And I want to also ask you guys, do you agree that Lorien is the most important Lord of the Rings card in Vintage? How has Lorien changed your deck? Let me know in the comments below. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe if you like videos like this one, or if you're interested in vintage gameplay, new videos on this channel every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I'll see you then.